Many visitors to Martha's Vineyard often observe that much of the island appears, to the eye at least, to be wonderfully open and undeveloped. And that's an accurate observation on the one hand, but it's also an illusion of sorts. Because while a century of land conservation on this island has resulted in permanent protection of about a third of the island, that is 60,000 acres or so, another third is undeveloped land with no conservation protection of any kind. The land is at risk of being developed. There's general agreement that much of the island's remaining unprotected open land should really be conserved if we want to keep our ponds clean and our farm soils working and our scenic vistas and wildlife habitat intact and functioning from an ecological perspective. But the dilemma is that not all of the island that needs to be protected will be saved in time, and that's because the rate at which land is being developed here is far outpacing the rate at which these conservation gains are being made. In a so-called build-out scenario under zoning, this could translate into thousands of new houses, a doubling of the year-round population here, and a further spike in the summer population numbers, and the necessity of providing all of the changes required to support a larger community. What do I mean by build-out? Build-out is a term that refers to developing to the maximum extent allowable under zoning. Present zoning on Martha's Vineyard, for example, would allow construction of about 7,400 additional houses, and that's not including guest houses. As for guest houses or outbuildings, present zoning would allow for about 9,000 more guest houses. And that's a problem. The scale of that kind of development on Martha's Vineyard would challenge our abilities to manage it. It would undermine scenic values and consume the open space and really come to change the vineyard as we know it. And how did all this happen on the vineyard? The vineyard's population doubled in the last 25 years. More than 200 new houses are built here every year, and more than half of the housing units are owned by second homeowners. So on the one hand, growth and development on this island has delivered some vineyard families out of hardship, but on the other, it's made it impossible for their children to compete in a real estate market that has spiraled out of reach for most. Total property values on Martha's Vineyard doubled between the year 2000 and 2005. So like many beautiful places, today we're on the receiving end of a worldwide demand for the second home market, even as the year-round population continues to grow. Compared to a statewide average population increase of about 6% elsewhere, the year-round population here on Martha's Vineyard surged by nearly 30% in the last decade. Census figures counted more than 15,000 people, and in summer, of course, that number approaches 100,000 people. We can count on both of those numbers continuing to grow in the future, and the concern is how will it impact our quality of life and our environmental assets. Water quality, for example. More than 80% of the houses on the island rely on in-ground septic systems for their wastewater disposal. The problem is that water tends to flow downhill. That means excessive nitrogen coming from these residential septic systems travels downhill through our very porous soils, causing decline in the water quality at the receiving end in our coastal ponds. The result is that eelgrass beds, which our fish and shellfish rely on, are disappearing. The decline is threatening not just the environment, but also the tourism and commercial fishing economy. Another example is habitat decline. 40% of the island is designated by the state as what's called priority habitat for native species and rare and endangered species of plants and animals. Our state forest and the whole south side of the island is home to a globally rare ecosystem called the sand plain, and the town of Aquina harbors some of the last of this planet's coastal heathland habitat. Unfortunately, human impacts in the form of house and road construction are taking a toll. And of course, the elephant in the room is global climate change. Impacts of climate change, including sea level rise, increased risk of wildfire, proliferation of invasive species of plants and marine life, is already beginning to threaten native habitats here on the vineyard. We know that heat-trapping carbon dioxide that we've emitted into the atmosphere for decades persists in the environment. This means that near-term warming of the climate of Martha's Vineyard will probably be on the order of 2 to 4 degrees Fahrenheit over the next 3 decades. We know that's unavoidable because of the past. Whether it will be worse depends on our ability to rein in future emissions. What does that mean for us? Probably extreme heat days will increase in the summer from the current number, which is about 10, to at least 30, and maybe as many as 60 days, depending on our ability to roll back the fossil fuel emission. The warming of the ocean will also cause the water to expand. The resulting rise in base sea level will cause a host of problems, including coastal erosion, inundation of wetlands, and exacerbated impacts of the storm surge from hurricanes, which will be more frequent and more intense. So what can we do in the face of such a threat? We can leave vulnerable lands undeveloped and stop building things in these areas. We can take steps to reduce carbon emissions. Individually, we can make changes in our lifestyles, drive more fuel-efficient cars, reduce our use of electricity, better insulate our homes. These are real, tangible steps within our power that cumulatively will make a difference and will help preserve what is special about the vineyard: the beautiful coastline, the vibrant agricultural community, and the rich native biological diversity.